The whole point is to intimidate journalists from doing accurate reporting on what's actually occurring on the ground.
How counterproductive could you possibly be?
What are you guys doing right now? Like, what are you really doing and what are you really advocating for?
I just wish that people were better at understanding the idea that someone can agree with you on like 80% of stuff, and then maybe a fifth of what you believe they disagree with. It doesn't make them your enemy. It doesn't mean that now, like, we're on different sides. Nobody agrees 100% on everything. And this idea that there are these issues we can't even question, it's just harmful because we're not having proper discussions. Somebody goes, hey, I don't like this birthing person's thing. And you're like, Nazi, bigot, you hate trans. You want to genocide trans people. You probably strangle trans children at school if you could. You know, it doesn't work like that. Okay, so
birthing people, really? Come on. For me, it's not even like, oh, I don't want to be inclusive and I don't want to think of, transgender people. It's the phrasing, like, it just makes you sound like a weird object that, like, you're a vessel and nothing more. Like, birthing people just sounds weird.
And it's uncomfortable and it has not been an enjoyable process for me. It's been difficult. And so the internet being what it is, all sorts of people from all sorts of political ideologies have theories on like what's actually happening with me, right? And the main accusation, both from the left and the right, is that I'm grifting, which is hilarious because literally nothing has changed about my work life. I'm in the same place. I have the same audience. The audience doesn't like some of what I have to say or some of the new conclusions I've come to. And so I wanted to kind of set the record straight about what I have personally experienced. I don't know what my political labels are at this point, right? Because I feel like I don't really fit anywhere. And that's just full honesty. It's, again, very uncomfortable for me. And I want to say that out of any point in my adult life, this is probably the point where I'm the most malleable and open to new information because of what I've experienced over the last few years. And I can get into details about that in just a moment. But
you see what I mean? Right? You see what I mean? She said some mild stuff and then you receive pushback and then she's like, you know what, I'm quite malleable now. Now, I don't think Ana Kasparian's going to do a Dave Rubin and go right wing because he was a grifter. That was all a grift, right? We all know he went basically. And I think Ana Kasparian revealed it herself that the right just paid him more. So off he went. But with her, imagine getting just constant abuse as soon as you say something. Nobody's not like, even imagine it's wrong. Imagine if you said something and it's incorrect and it's not a great take. And then people are horrible to you about it. Most people are probably just going to double down and are just going to become defensive. It's natural. I'm sure we've all done it before. You get into an argument, maybe with your significant other, maybe with a friend, and you start to realize, oh, I might actually be wrong here. I'm just getting defensive because they went hard against me. Because now she is rethinking her whole politics. Because she's like, well, wait, if these people are treating me this way, right, well, what does that say about my side? Maybe I am on the wrong side. And like, how counterproductive can you possibly be? How counterproductive can you be?
That was the reason why I told Adam that, no, this isn't like a Daily Wire thing. I have no interest in working at the Daily Wire. I have no interest in leaving TYT. If anything, I just feel a responsibility to kind of correct what I got wrong in the past to the best of my ability and just do better moving forward. And the reason why I've been at TYT as long as I have is, despite what any of you might think about Cenk, he has never once tried to censor me or tell me what I can and can't say. That's the reason why, we get into these fiery debates and there's never any like retaliation for it. And as long as I'm free to speak my mind and genuinely speak my mind the way I have been, I plan on staying there. And there's absolutely no monetary or financial incentive for me to do anything I'm doing right now.
Well, Sitch and I box a lot on this show. And I think people, I think they like that. I think they admire that we are able to fight with one another over a policy position and still walk away friends. So I spent the last week, I was watching a bunch of your most recent.
Like, it's so sad that we've gotten here to the point where now, if it's actually weird to people to say, wait, you guys don't agree politically and you don't think that each other are horrible, disgusting people? You mean the more right-wing one doesn't think the other one's a communist, and the more left-wing one doesn't think that the right-wing one's a Nazi who wants genocide? Wow! Right? But like, that's literally it. That's the stage we're at with online politics, right? Where it's like, wait, you guys disagree and you don't want each other dead?
Videos. And I mean, you're snapping back at Cenk quite often. I mean, it's actually quite refreshing. There's a couple things, and we have questions on these, but I'll let Sitch. I don't know. Do you have anything that you want to ask before we get started?
So yeah, it turns out that Ana is a massive fan of our program. She's seen every episode, just huge fan, right?
Well, okay, so I happened to come across a video you guys did about me. It was the stream on, I hate to name names, but you guys were covering the leftist mafia and their insane gaslighting video about me. And you guys were the only ones, as far as I could see, that actually did a good job in highlighting how badly they were gaslighting me. Right. And so I thank you for doing that, because, you know, when everyone around you, everyone who alleges to be your friends, tells you something you know isn't true, but they keep repeating it to you over and over again, you start asking yourself, like, am I the crazy one? You know? So that, I really appreciated that. But, you know, you guys have put out a ton of videos about me that have not been friendly or nice, and it's okay. I mean, I can be a good sport about it, and I do think that you guys raised a few valid points, and I just need to be willing to accept where I was wrong and where people are critiquing from good faith. Like, you guys have a little bit of an edgy style, so I'll acknowledge that. But I have thick skin, so it didn't really bother me that much.
I mean, that's commendable. You know, we are in this kind of like internet environment where everyone's very attacky to each other.
Totally.
Especially when they're not.
You need a fucking thick skin on the internet. But I have the thickest, and I just love winding people up and getting them screaming at me. It's quite funny. Not like a troll, just if I find their views to be stupid, it is quite amusing.
Person, so
yeah,
you have to have kind of a thick skin. And I know, but I mean, you're talking about earlier, and one of the things that we always commended you on was, you know, when you publicly came out and you said that you were wrong about the Rittenhouse video, which, I mean, most people, when they make a mistake, they just try to hide it, or they try to shift blame. You know, Jimmy Dore very, you know, famously shifted blame to his producer. And I thought it was really commendable that you came out and you're like, no, I got this wrong. And you were trying to show, not just do this like for your sake, but just say, like, listen, audience, you know, you need to understand that this is the story, and you know, I don't want you guys to have the wrong information.
Yeah, there was. Look, the one
that is genuinely commendable online.
I guess through line you'll notice in the various things.
Another thing which shouldn't have to be commendable. No, another thing which you shouldn't have to go, oh, you really? So you were wrong and you admitted it. But unfortunately, especially in the online world, but I think just in the world generally, right, people have trouble admitting when they're wrong. I'm quite bad for it. If I think I'm right, I just won't stop arguing. But if I am proven wrong, I will back down. Right? And I just wish more people would do that.
We're going to talk about in this conversation is that it just became abundantly clear to me that where I was getting my information, and I'm not just talking about, like, you know, independent lefty outlets. I'm talking about like legacy media outlets, right? A lot of them, it's not that they report misinformation, it's that they omit details of the story that would, you know, maybe the additional details of the story don't change your mind at all, right? But it's not up to them to decide that. Like, we should know every detail. I think the Amy Cooper story is another example. You know, it was fairly recently I came across Camille Foster's very in-depth investigation into that story, and there were so many details of that story that were intentionally omitted or left out of the legacy media reporting of it. And that painted a picture in my mind and in the minds of many others that, you know, there's no justification for the way that she was, you know, panicking when she was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, right? But then you get this, then you find out, based on what Camille Foster had found out and reported, was that, like, she didn't have good cell reception. So the person on the other end of that conversation couldn't hear her. She was panicking because she genuinely thought that she was at risk after, here's another thing that was omitted in a lot of the reports, after she was literally threatened by the bird watcher, right? Who said,
Right.
you know, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, and you're not going to like it. And then he proceeds to try to lure her dog to him. And listen,
Yeah.
you might still feel that her behavior was uncalled for, whatever. That's up to you. But you should know all those details. And I will say, from my personal opinion, if I'm alone at a park and some random guy tries to lure my dog away
I
from
wasn't
me,
sure. So I wasn't sure which one this was, because I was like, I don't really know about this case. I was kind of just letting it speak. That was the dog walker woman. I had heard that. I'm not on top of that, and I'm not going over it now. But you do have to be careful of this, right? All the time when you're looking at clips online. I remember you didn't see the beginning. I remember I got into an argument about police racism with some friends. I saw a clip, and then like half an hour later, not even long, like on a WhatsApp group. Then on YouTube, I saw a clip of this, what appeared to be a black guy, just paid for something, trying to show the police his receipt as they slam him on the floor, and then they slam him on the floor. They say, "No, come on, you can't come with us." He's like, "Stop resisting," blah blah blah. And then everyone's filming it. Even the people around them are filming it in the car park outside, and they're trying to drag him to the car. Oh yeah, you see a black man, blah blah blah. And that's exactly what it looked like. And I was literally about to send it to them until I then saw a follow-up video which showed the guy riding a little children's electric thing round, like car thing round the shop. The woman's chasing him all over the shop, trying to get him to stop. And then apparently it turns out that she was trying to bar him from the shop, and you have to get the police involved to bar someone in that state from re-entering the shop or whatever. So it's actually bollocks. So you actually always have to double check when you see these clips. We all have the reactions. We all fail sometimes, and we all leap to conclusions. But you do have to be careful. She's right.
I'm going to freak out, like I just am. And so, okay, with the Rittenhouse story, I was going to cover the trial, and I just needed to go back and just like really, really look at all of the details and remember all the details. So when I do the story, I get the facts right. And then as I'm doing that, I come across a New York Times video. And this was a really, really well done video that they posted on YouTube that showed you in slow motion, like how everything transpired that night.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see it for yourself, it's really, really difficult to argue that in those moments, he was not acting in self-defense. And
Right.
This is an area where, Cenk and I disagree because, if someone's hitting you over the head with a skateboard, that could kill you, And so, Cenk is he's a strong-minded person, and he's not one to back down from a fight. So in his mind, someone confronts you with a skateboard, he doesn't see it as a threat, but I do. And
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. If you're talking about a 17-year-old kid, a 17-year-old kid, someone's chasing with a skateboard. But my whole thing with the Rittenhouse debacle was, in the situation, that's 100% self-defense. Personally, I don't think you should be able to take a gun to a riot. I understand, they wanted to protect people. I just feel like that's vigilantism. I don't think he was a vigilante. He didn't break any US laws. But I kind of feel like a rifle should be like a wheelbarrow full of bricks. Right? You're in the States, if you have open carry, it's fine. Well, no, even in England, it's perfectly legal to wheel a wheelbarrow full of bricks, right? Because you might be building a wall, you could be doing anything. Right? If you go to a riot with a wheelbarrow full of bricks, and the police stop you, what are you doing? Oh, well, last time they were throwing bricks at us, so I got something else to chuck them back. Well, no, you're going to be arrested. I kind of feel a rifle should be the same. But yeah, basically agree with Anna's take here, though.
Burly guy who can like defend himself against someone who's like hitting him over the head with a skateboard as he's lying on his back. So Once I saw all those details, first of all, I had to convey them to my audience and be honest about what the reality was. The other thing was, there was a lot of misreporting about how Kyle Rittenhouse was in possession of an illegal weapon and that he crossed state lines with that illegal weapon. Okay?
Yep.
So that was a lie. And it's not a lie that I just made up in my mind, right? That was how it was reported initially, which is why I would mention the state lines, but not because, oh, how dare he cross state lines? Anyone in this country has the right to cross state lines. It was because it was reported that he was in possession of an illegal gun,
Right.
and he traveled across state lines with an illegal gun, which is a serious charge. But it turned out that he did not travel across state lines with that
Yeah,
weapon.
he didn't do that. Yeah,
some of the reporting on it was terrible. I looked at like I watched stuff on CNN and MSNBC where people were calling him a white nationalist killer, and it's like, this is why there's the division. This is why now Ana Kasparian's getting ostracized, right? Because it's gotten to such a stage where everyone's just divorced from facts and everyone's just talking about, and everyone has an immediate visceral reaction to something. Doubles down, doubles down, doubles down. You have to agree with wholeheartedly with everything. It's not enough to go, oh, I mostly agree, but I think this is wrong. No. And so now even the news end up spreading rubbish, right? Even the news now ends up spreading rubbish to make sure they're, right in line with all the views that all of their supporters are supposed to have. And you're getting this in left-wing and right-wing media. It's a problem globally, right? In the whole world. Right.
Right.
Was in the area already. Yeah.
Exactly. He bought it from a friend when he was already in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Sitch, the night of that event, I mean, maybe a day afterwards, Sitch and I were watching those videos online as they were breaking out. And I saw the reporting was basically wrong on CNN the night the viral videos were released. Don Lemon was saying, a white kid shoots into a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters. And I'm like,
yeah,
what?
Yep.
That's insane. Yeah. So they kind of poison the narrative from the get-go. And then everyone just kind of gets caught up in it.
Yeah, and that's how misinformation spreads. And that was a pivotal moment for me because, again, misinforming the audience is not something I have any interest in. And I might give them the facts and they might not like it, but I can't withhold information from them because I'm afraid that they might not like it. So I'm going to give them the facts. But, I've learned to be better about, first of all, the sources I trust. I make an effort to just be cognizant of the filter bubbles we all exist in, the filter bubbles I exist in. And I've broken through that bubble a little bit to, look at other sources that I typically wouldn't have looked at. And then the other thing that I do now is I just wait. I think the story involving the so-called city bike Karen is a good example of that. The main show, because TYT consists of many different shows, right?
Yeah,
the show
that if people don't know that City Bike Karen, basically, she tried to get a bike. It was like a little nurse on the way home from. I say little nurse because she was short. Not short. She was shorter than at least the five guys who were stood around this bike. She goes up, tries to get the bike. Like, that's our bike. You booked, blah blah blah. And she's like, no, and then starts screaming help because she's a woman alone, surrounded by five guys. Because the guys were black, everyone was like, oh, Karen, racist. No, and then it's like. No, I think there's some glitch in the system where they both booked the bike, or there was some sort of thing where if somebody has booked the bike, they can pull it out and plop it back in, and then basically they can then take the bike. Either way, right? Either way, people looked at it, went berserk, called her a racist, and said she was crying. And it's like, what? Like 5'2" women go up to a group of like 4, 5, 6 foot tall dudes of any ethnicity, right? And start trying to get a bike off them and steal the bike from them, right? The whole thing was like nuts. It was like, okay, clearly there's got to be more to it. We were like, no, it's because she's white and she thinks she can just go up and then scream for help and people will come and help her. And then, of course, when you looked into it, that was just nonsense. But this is how people's minds work. This is why you must not react to a 30-second clip until we know the full picture. We're all doing it. We're all scrolling through the social media. You see the clip. Yeah, that's terrible. But the problem is we don't know from 30 seconds what the full story is necessarily, right? Sometimes we do, but usually we don't. And that was a prime example of it. And this is the problem because, oh no, now she's terrible. This is why they're saying now she's right wing because now, oh, she had the wrong view on this, the wrong view on this. But the view she was, the in inverted commas right view, right, was just wrong. It wasn't part of the facts. It was just react and then have the view because you're on our side politically. So you have to have 100% of these views because even 99.9 means you're a Nazi. Well, not a Nazi. That's not fair. People aren't calling her a Nazi. They're just calling her right wing. Right? That's not fair. Okay. Conservative then. But either way, that's stupid.
I'm the executive producer and host of is the main flagship show, The Young Turks. And prior to that story breaking, I had a meeting with my team and I was like, listen, I don't want you guys pitching stories about random individuals in the country who are caught in an out of context video allegedly behaving badly. I think these stories are divisive. I don't think we usually have the full details before we talk about these stories. And honestly, at the end of the day, engaging in these witch hunts is actually causing more division and hate in the country than anything else. So like, if there's a story that's particularly like jarring and you guys really do want to cover it, that's fine. But just understand that we are going to wait. Like, we are not in the business of breaking news. I don't give a shit about being the first in reporting the story or whatever. I want to make sure that when we do, we actually report it correctly and we don't have egg on our face later. Now, there are a bunch of other shows on the network that I have no say over, that I have no control over, who, you know, inaccurately reported on it. And
there's some very left-wing shows that I've seen on the Young Turks that do some very silly shit. They have some commentators on there who are just, who have your typical online kind of brain dead like Lefty Takes without thinking. And even saying Lefty Takes, because I know a lot of like, and you read like really sensible like people who are on the left, and then you go online, or on the left, or indeed like on the right, like conservatives. I'm not talking about far right people. And then you go online, and it's effing mental. It really is nuts.
Traction. They had to take videos down, all that stuff. And I just think that was a teachable moment, hopefully a teachable moment for everyone in the company. But certainly, you know, this is an ongoing conversation I have with my team. And luckily, I don't know how I did it. I feel like I found unicorn producers because they're really smart, super open-minded. You know, they're less interested in this left versus right or partisan garbage. And they're more interested in making sure that if we're going to report stories, we get it accurate. And so we're moving slowly but surely in a direction that I think is better, not just for the show, but I think better in terms of like what we add to society. Like, the last thing I want to do is be the other side of right-wing disinformation, right? Like, if we're going to be critical of disinformation we see happening in various videos and that are produced by other people, we should
this is like such a good
at least look inward a little bit and make sure that we're doing our due diligence.
Well, it remains to be seen. Are they doing that? I don't watch the Young Turks that much. Maybe like they are. Maybe people can find examples of them not. But like, seriously, that's how journalism should be.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting you were
From
saying
what she's saying.
With the media, a lot of the misinformation comes from like they leave stuff out. And that's been my experience too, is just this intentional leaving out of key information, or they'll like the headline or the subsection will kind of frame something in a very specific way. So even when you get to like kind of the contradictory information, your mind is already like made up by that point. So it doesn't matter. And so it leads to this kind of effect where like once a person once that story hits that, like you or me or anyone, because I kind of went to the same experience where like once something hits me in a specific way, like it's like I'm free of the matrix. Suddenly I'm starting to see like things a little bit differently. All the dominoes kind of start to fall, and I say, oh wait, I start to see like where all the misinformation is coming from. Was the Rittenhouse thing like, was that like the key moment, or was there something else that kind of like made you shift your thinking?
So that was one of the pivotal moments, but honestly, I would say everything for me started when I started getting gaslit on the crime wave. And it's really interesting to talk about these various political issues in the abstract. But then once you personally experience something, and once you see something happening in the country with your own two eyes, and your political side is incessantly gaslighting you on it, it makes you question, well, what else are you guys lying about? Or what else are you guys gaslighting about? And that's what happened. So, you know, during the pandemic, there was absolutely a crime wave in the country, mostly in like major cities. Los Angeles happened to be one of them. And, you know, I talked about how I, you know, was assaulted. Well, actually, let me give you the details again, because there's an element to that story that I've never shared with anyone that also explains where my head's at now. So, as I was walking my dog one day, there were these two guys. They appeared to be homeless. They appeared to be on something. They looked like they might be methed out or something because they were kind of acting erratically. But, typically when I come across guys like that, if I ignore them, they won't do anything.
Right.
That wasn't the case this time around. They're coming toward me, and my dog, Charlie, like, he does his business. And as I bend over to pick up his business, one of them grabs me by my hips and just, like, with an erection and everything, just starts, like, humping me, like,
Wow.
right there in, like, broad daylight. And
Right.
it was terrifying because, like, I didn't have any weapon with me, no taser, no pepper spray, nothing.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
and luckily the guy, he did that, and then he and his friend walk away while they're, like, laughing at me.
I feel like women should be allowed to carry tasers. So this probably doesn't apply to America, where, like, in a lot of states, most people can carry a gun, or it depends if you're in a concealed carry place. But in the UK, any kind of concealed weapon is a serious crime. Right? Anything on you that could be considered a concealed weapon. I kind of think we should suspend it for pepper spray and tasers in terms of for women. I think it evens the odds a bit. Right? If men still aren't allowed to carry tasers, but women could zap them. But obviously, if you use it incorrectly, then you can face prosecution for serious assault. Then, just to make everything fair. Seems fair. Because Jesus.
And if I felt so degraded, scared. And, like, the first thing I did is I called my husband, and he came down and he's like, where are they? And he started looking for them. We couldn't find them. The cops wouldn't come. Like, we actually had an incident in front of our building, like, a few weeks prior to that. That was really scary. We called the police, and the police just wouldn't come. Like, it was amazing. And now, in retrospect, I realized the reason why is because there was a shortage. And I think that there was, like, an unofficial strike, considering what happened in 2020 and all the protests. So they just wouldn't show up. And I just didn't even think.
Okay, there was an unofficial strike, though. I do. That sounds like pure speculation to me. That is messed up. There's a reason the police aren't allowed to strike, right? It's not because we're, like, anti-strike, anti-this. It's just, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I do feel like the police in America, in a lot of states, at least in a lot of areas, need, like, massive retraining due to just how they deal with things. But I'd probably say that to some extent here too. So, but yeah, I feel like this whole thing's messed up. It really is. That's pretty messed up. I'm sorry.
To call the cops because I'm like, what's the point? These guys have already, like, left and they're not going to be able to find them. But anyway, I opened up about that, and I also started opening up about, just what the statistics were indicating in regard to crime and how it's obviously having a negative impact on all communities, but mostly the communities that, like, BLM and leftists claim to care so much about, the disadvantaged communities. Crime on the metro system in LA has been unbelievable. And the majority of people who take the metro, who take buses and public transportation, they're usually, like, immigrant workers. They're usually, blue collar workers who, don't have enough money to buy a car, for instance. And so I was like, why are you guys cool with just having these people deal with this kind of violence? There was, like, a phase last year where people were literally being set on fire randomly on buses. Jeez. And that would get no attention, no news coverage, and it would infuriate me. And so when I opened up about what happened to me in my own neighborhood, what I thought was telling was how not everyone, but some people accuse me of pushing racist stereotypes. But I had never, ever disclosed the race of these two individuals, ever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they just assumed that these two guys were black. They weren't black. They were two white guys. But, like,
So I'm not laughing at any of the situation. It's just the fact that that's so fucking typical. Oh, I always feel like this, that behind this, like, there's this inherent racism. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're always like, oh, so, the point where she's like, hey, these two guys tried to rape me. Oh, spreading racial stereotypes again. Okay, I mean, these dudes were white, so, you know what I mean? Because a lot of it, I think that sometimes that there's, like, I don't know, maybe an inner fear of their own racism, so they go too far the other way kind of thing to try and, like, to try and, like, virtue signal, oh, I'm not really the racist. But, yeah, it's pretty bad.
Never shared that publicly because I didn't think the race really mattered, right? What actually happened mattered. And I thought the reaction to it by the people who are supposed to allegedly want dignity for everyone reacted to it. Like, that really bothered me. So that was the beginning of it. I would say that's what started me questioning everything and wanting to like look deeper into everything. And then other things happened. So the misrepresentation of what was happening to Asian Americans. So there would be all these videos of Asian Americans getting sucker punched or hit over the head with, you know, whatever. And the main narrative on the left was, this is anti-Asian hate.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at all of those stories individually, it usually involved like a repeat criminal or someone who's just been left on the streets with severe mental health issues. Like, people basically carrying out these acts of violence because they don't have their head in the right place.
Well, this is actually an issue in a lot of respects with some online stuff. I've seen some. There was a thing I just seem to calm down a bit now. That you still see it a lot, where there'll be a lot of like racist people who would just post pictures of black people hitting a white person and go, see, they're violent. And it's like, no, dude, you're going around like Googling a black man beats a white man, right? So the same thing I think probably happened here, where you've got, but slightly differently, where you collate videos of Asian people being beaten up, but they're not necessarily all racist attacks. I don't know enough about this. I don't know whether she's right or wrong about this.
Help, whatever it is, but like, to just brush it off as,
I just know I saw the
it's
racist
just anti-Asian hate that's been inspired by the right wing. It just wasn't true.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just thought it was wrong to frame it that way, when in reality, there was a real issue with, you know, repeat offenders, and in some cases, people with severe mental health issues, honestly, randomly targeting all sorts of people. But, you know, since a lot of this was happening in areas like San Francisco, where there's a sizable Asian population, the narrative on the left became, oh, it's just anti-Asian hate that's been inspired by the right. And I just didn't really see much evidence of that. Then there was the attacks on straight news journalists who were doing their jobs. For instance, when Li Fang was reporting on the BLM protests, when he was accurately reporting on the BLM protests and some of the violence that took place during those protests, his own colleagues at The Intercept tried to paint him as a racist. I've known Li Fang for many, many years, since I started working at TYT. Guy doesn't have a racist bone in his body. For them to paint him in that way, I thought was disgusting, and it had a chilling effect, right? The whole point is to intimidate journalists from doing accurate reporting on what's actually occurring on the ground. Then there was what happened to Jesse Singal, which I found.
I don't think that part's true per se. I don't know if there's that much thought behind it. I think everyone has these views. They say anyone who doesn't agree with the views is evil, Nazi, racist, far right, extremist, evil, bad, terrible person. And then somebody disagrees with it slightly, and they go berserk, right? So somebody doesn't agree with 100% of their ideology, and they're incapable of seeing that therefore, this doesn't mean that they're far right because they disagree with me on one or two things. This does happen on the right as well. I'm a liberal, I'm pretty moderate on a lot of stuff. Less so liberal values like individual freedom, but just generally pretty moderate on most issues. My dad, very, very right wing, not far right, just very, very conservative. He's convinced I'm a communist, and will regularly, I'll make some like fairly like milquetoast liberal point. You go, can you believe it? Can you believe it? My son's a communist. So yeah, I think this exists on both sides, right? And you need to be clear about this. But this vehement vitriol at the moment directed against people who agree with most of what you believe does seem to be worse online in left-wing and liberal circles, especially like the far left circles of the online left. People on the right seem to just be getting more angry about, I don't know, trans stuff again.
Disgusting. I didn't know about that until at some point this year. I would say earlier this year.
With the trans stuff? Jesse's been on the show before. Yeah, he's done great.
Jesse Singal is a good faith, I think, critical thinker. I'm subscribed to Blocked and Reported. I have listened to endless podcast episodes from Blocked and Reported. I haven't seen anything from Jesse Singal that communicates to me that he is a transphobe, that he is a bad person. He did straight news reporting on basically what, some of the risks could be when it comes to transitioning literal kids with puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. And through his reporting, which I'm very sad to say I didn't really come across until this year, I learned that I was wrong about a bunch of other things, right? So for instance, it is a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases, they are not, and they can cause irreparable harm. And look, you might think, okay, but you got to do a balancing act.
With some of that stuff. I think like a lot of that technology is in its infancy with the puberty blockers, with all of this kind of stuff. So there just isn't actually enough research on a lot of it. And a lot of that's coming out now. I think people want to leap to conclusions, and I get it. Listen, to be honest, especially if you're trans and I think everyone wants to make out like puberty blockers is a really, really, really simple issue. So if you're right wing, no, never to a child, and then if you're left wing, no, you're absolutely a child as soon as they hit puberty, if they think they're trans, should be immediately given puberty blockers, right? Obviously, both positions are ridiculous. So the issue you have is, especially for trans women, but trans men too, if you go through male puberty, it's very difficult to get rid of a lot of those characteristics, right? Like, for example, if I realized I was trans now, even with all the money in the world, with all the facial feminization surgery, with all the hormones, I'm still like nearly 6 foot, like 5'11", broad shoulder. Like, I mean, there's women who are 5'11", 6 foot, but like, there were cis women who were 5'11", 6 foot, I meant. And but I've got the broad shoulders. It's very difficult. I'm never going to 100% pass. So if I have dysphoria and I hate my body, right, it's easy to see why you would want to transition younger. You'd want to get on the puberty blockers. You'd want to prevent going through the male puberty so that you can never be in the truth that in many cases, not all, many cases, they're going to struggle to be in the body that they really want to be in. However, on the other hand, there's evidence that's come out recently showing that showing that actually, I think about 40% of kids who are having gender issues when they're teenagers would go on to be trans, but it rises to 60% of those on puberty blockers. But even that's not open and shut, because, well, what if there was extra 20% are just really happy? They end up transitioning where they wouldn't, but they live happy lives. Well, that would throw a spanner in the works. So it's very complicated. And I think anyone telling you that we have simple answers on these things is just wrong. They're just incorrect. We don't yet. We will. The research will come out. We'll understand these things better. But and listen, I realise that's no consolation to a trans person or to a parent of somebody whose kid's having gender dysphoria, right? But unfortunately, as we get more information, we'll know more, and it's a very, very tough issue. Again, saying, hey, I'm not sure we should do puberty blockers for kids does not make you anti-trans. I think if you're oversimplifying the issue, it's insensitive. Not insensitive, it's just, not even insensitive like on a moral level, you're just not, it's a very complicated issue. And if you're saying it's not complicated, you're wrong. But I just hate this. I hate this. Either you agree with 100% or you're an enemy. And those are the only options you have.
And if a child or if a teenager has severe gender dysphoria and it would actually be better for that person to go on puberty blocks, okay, I mean, we should be able to balance that out. But my point here is withholding the information because you don't like the information getting out there ain't the way to go, because that destroys any opportunity for us to actually have a good faith debate about what we should do moving forward. What are the pros and cons? So there's that, all of this stuff just started adding up. And through listening to Blocked and Reported, I found out I got a lot of stories wrong as well. Rebecca Jones ended up being a liar and a grifter. And I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known that had I not, opened my mind up to other voices.
Rebecca Jones was the one that went after DeSantis, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And she's a complete liar. And we uplifted her, we enabled her, and I feel disgusting that we did that. So I issued a retraction and a correction on that story. I don't know what the reaction was.
My reaction was good.
Yeah.
What is some of the reaction like? One of the problems that we often have, obviously we're labeled right wingers all the time. Anyone who watches our show knows we're pretty much like disaffected liberals. Like
really?
to call us right wing is just
online.
We are constantly called right wingers just because we don't straw man the arguments that are made on the right. And so many people on the left, all they are familiar with is the straw man version of the trans issue or some particular news story. So what is some of the reaction that you have gotten to that?
Well, I mean, the reaction has not been great. I mean, look, that leftist mafia stream was unbelievable to me. Like the accusations that were thrown out there, Olay implying that I'm racist because as a woman, I don't want to be called a birthing person. Like race didn't come up at all until she brought it up. And then she was the only one on that stream who brought race into it and like made it abundantly clear that she's got an issue with white women and just thinks they're all the same and like, whatever. and then after I basically called her out on it, she's like, "Oh, you're attacking me and only me because I'm black." And it's like, no, you're the only one in that group of people who attacked me and accused me of being racist because I personally want to be called a woman. So, I mean,
I think she's talking about we're going to watch her soon. It's like Olunati or something. I forget the name. I apologize. But yeah, we're going to watch that one soon. I don't know if we're going to watch the whole of this 3-hour podcast because I want to get on some of the. I think we need to watch the. Yeah, I think we want to get onto that. She actually did a response to Anna. So she said, "Oh, I feel like this is the white woman coddling hour because people were like trying to take a balanced view. I think of Anna." And then she went on this did this whole other show with Lance, the Surfs, who, as you can imagine, came on with very reasonable, sensible, balanced view. No, it was a shit show. I think she had Soul Bunny on later, who's also known as being a bit mental. So, I don't want to say mental, that's not right. Who's well known for having crazed views. Well, extreme views, right? So we'll get to that later. But anyway, let's crack on with this.
I'm not sure that they fully understand the damage that accusation can do. And if they do, that makes it even more.
They understand.
Okay.
They understand.
That makes it even more horrible. I think she published a video of you that was you saying the N-word, and it was back when YouTube didn't have this big prohibition on saying the N-word, and you weren't. It's not like you were calling people the N-word. You were using it, quoting stories. So all of these are taken out of context, which is completely unfair.
Yeah, I mean, look. So it's really funny because that compilation video wasn't made by her. If you guys remember, at some point last year, everyone was going after Rogan for saying the N-word. And so someone on the left had made a compilation video of all the times he had said the N-word on his podcast. And then in response to that, someone on the right made a compilation of all the times like I had said the N-word, right? Or me and Cenk had said so someone on the right made that video. And we had a company meeting, the producers, everyone, we got together, and this is like years and years ago. The last time we actually uttered that word on air was in 2012. But we sat down and we talked about whether...
No, that's it. I think it proves they're all Nazis. There you go. No, they said it in... But that's being online for you.
We should actually say the word when we're quoting someone that we are condemning as racist, or should we sanitize it and say N-word instead? And so we had a vote, and we decided at the time that it was better to actually read the quotes verbatim as opposed to sanitizing it. And I knew it would eventually come back to bite me in the ass. And it did. And I'm not going to apologize for it because context matters, intention matters. And what people like Olay are trying to do is erase all of that, right? To make it seem as though intention is totally irrelevant, context is totally irrelevant. If she says someone's racist, then by definition, that person is racist, end of story, period. And I just disagree. I also disagree with racism of all sorts, right? So I find it disgusting when people make generalizations about Black people or migrants or any group. Why would I somehow be okay making generalizations about white women or white people, right? So I find it gross and divisive. And look, at the center of all of this is I've been doing this shit for like 17 years and things have gotten worse. And I just don't think whatever strategy the left thinks they're engaging in is an effective strategy. I think it's actually caused more harm than good. I think their rhetoric and their discourse is a lot of times ignorant of the facts. And I think that they go around accusing people of doing things that they themselves engage in. And I was part of that too. I'm trying to do better moving forward. But a lot of people are going to look at this and think, oh, well, then that means she's a right winger. Whatever. You can call me whatever you want. I don't care what you label me as. But
just not birthing person.
Don't call me a birthing person. A person with a uterus. Yeah, exactly.
I don't blame you at all. So
yeah. I don't know. I don't know what my labels are at this point because I don't fit in anywhere. I feel like
you feel like you're becoming.
Why do they need to say birthing person even? Well, actually, that's a point because before I was saying like I don't think it's an issue. It won't bother me, which is true. But then why can't they say person? Why do you need all these Michigan phrases? Why not just say person? Why not just say person? I just realised that. I don't know why it's taken me years to realise that. But why do you have to go? Like if I'm doing something about cervical cancer and I want to be inclusive to women, non-binary people, trans men who might all have cervixes, why do I need to say as a cervix haver instead just say, as a person may have cervical cancer. If you're looking at the cervical cancer thing, I'm going to assume you've got a cervix. I realise statistically there's going to be some tiny percentage of cis men who are going to be stupid enough to walk in and go, do I have a cervix? If they just see person. But let's just discount them because it's their own fault.
Politically homeless, maybe a little bit.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think's causing sort of this shift in the left and in media? Or, I mean, first of all, I'm assuming you think there is a shift that's happening on the left and in media.
It's funny because, a lot of them LARP is like anti-capitalist, like revolutionaries or whatever.
LARP. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it's true. And so it's really funny because what they do is they are positioning themselves to attract a very specific niche in audiences, right? So they're going for the purists, the people who like to think of themselves as like far left, communist, socialist, whatever. But like the whole thing is, I mean, you can see it in the various streams. Like they'll talk about things through the lens of we're the most pure, like we're the most sincere in what we're saying, whatever.
The real
left,
like, yeah.
Exactly, we're the real left. So when they do that, what ends up happening is they become more and more extreme in what they are saying, right? In what they claim to believe. And at the heart of that, like what they're actually doing is trying to attract a niche audience for what? To make money. I think there's a financial motive behind it. They're competing with one another for a particular niche, a particular ideology that's reflected in these audiences. And I think I'm probably self-sabotaging right now, career-wise. But I don't know. The problem is once you see certain things, you can't unsee them.
Right.
And I can't just lie. I can't do it with a straight face. It's just not who I am.
What do you mean? Are you talking self-sabotaging by talking to us or talking about these things in general? Because it's an interesting dynamic that we have here on the internet, because I do agree with you. We've talked about this on the show many, many times. Like the incendiary voices in the political space are the ones that get attention, blow their channels up, get views, become rich, basically.
Yeah,
conflict entrepreneurs is what I always call them. And we're in a kind of a, we are in the same kind of position that you've kind of come to. Like we want to give an honest, a fair assessment of both sides of the argument and try to.
It is actually true. As somebody's kind of just starting out, right? The temptation, not a temptation because I would never do that, but you understand why some people get tempted to just pick a side and go just hard on that side. Because that's what people like. That's what people like to see. Right? They want to see you, no, I'm all on this side. They have 100% of the views of everyone on this side and then just attack the other. Fuck truth. Fuck accuracy. Right? Doesn't matter. Just, just pick a side and go after the other constantly. And it is an easy way to get views. It is an easy way to get likes. But it's causing this discourse where someone like Ana Kasparian, right, can come out and say, I have this tiny disagreement with the general, I don't like being called a birthing person. Like, transphobe, she's become a conservative and therefore fascist. And it's like, bro, chill. We don't all have to have exactly the same views on absolutely every matter, right? But the internet feeds it both ways, because as she was saying, it pushes you right into wanting to pander to that. So even if you're a content creator or something, you start pandering to it, and even now it comes offline, right? So now you see it more in offline culture, even where you just pander to your own side and just don't even care about truth or what's accurately happening.
Kind of come to some sort of truth. And one of the paths that I think we've kind of fell into is just, I think us, Sitch and I, arguing points makes it interesting enough that we can kind of build an audience. And watching the videos of you last week, it kind of feels like that's kind of the direction you're going. It seems like Cenk is saying over the top things and you're reeling him in, which is, I got to tell you, when I'm watching your show, I'm going, oh, look, Ana is just like Sitch. She won't let Cenk have any fun.
Are you saying you're the one saying over the top things?
Look, constantly. And Sitch is like no, Adam, that we don't know that yet. So, but I think our audience understands that there's a little bit of a dynamic going there. That's fun, but at the same time, they are getting the information. So, unfortunately for my reputation, it's like, don't listen to Adam. He's always.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, again, credit to Cenk, because he's not like one of these like people who get super offended if you correct him right there on the spot. It's just, I kind of went along with some of the more hyperbolic commentary, mostly because I was reading the same sources and I had the same, I think he's doing better and better. Like we have a lot of conversations about a lot of these issues privately, and I'll just be like, look.
So Sitch does the same thing to me.
Yeah. And I'll just be like, look. I mean, before.
Okay, yeah, we definitely will watch this last bit then, because I just realised that's.
He was going to go.
We might watch all of this, maybe.
He asked me if I thought it was a good idea that he was going to go debate Destiny, and I said no. And it's mostly because I see a lot of clickbaity stuff going on in that realm too, like with some of the debate stuff that takes place. But also, I asked him, like, what are you guys going to debate? So first he said, oh, we're going to talk about like the Democratic Party and our disagreements about it. I was fine with that, but then he mentioned, he's like, and then we're going to talk about Rittenhouse.
So he knew Rittenhouse was going to come up.
Yeah. I think they agreed on the topics ahead of time.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
And we had it. Look, Cenk is his own man. The best I can do is share my perspective. And I just told him, I was like, but he was acting in self-defense. But look, Cenk just has a different perspective. It is what it is. Like, I'm not here to talk shit about Cenk. Like we and again, I want to give him credit because we can have the conversation on air, this exact conversation. And he's going to say the exact same thing. I'm going to say my piece, and it's not going to lead to like an uncomfortable relationship with him. It's not going to lead to retaliation. And I really commend him for having an open mind. But to him, he just couldn't. He just disagrees about it being self.
I think we need to teach people, like kids at school, right, to deal with first with adversity, and second with people just not agreeing with you, and how to actually have a conversation with people. Maybe we should do like mandatory debate clubs in school, so that people can learn. Like, don't get me wrong, okay? There are things somebody could disagree with you on, and that could mean you can't be friends with them. If someone thinks it's okay to molest kids, yeah, don't be friends with them. If someone thinks it was like a Nazi, okay, fine. Like, I get why you don't want to be friends with them. But, and I mean actual Nazi as in like, is racist, supports like racist laws, genocide, blah, blah, blah. Right? I'm not talking about, Ana Kasparian said, don't call me a birthing person, so we can just now assume she's basically Hitler. Right? But anyway, let's crack on.
Defense. He thinks like he didn't need to like shoot the gun. He didn't need to kill people. I hear you. I wish it didn't end that way. But if I were in his shoes, I would have done the same thing.
Yeah, I probably would have prayed and sprayed. So I mean, Rittenhouse did the right thing. Like, it's a good thing he was in control of the weapon instead of me. So
yeah,
it's funny that like this gets thrown around a lot. Like, people accuse you of grifting or other people of grifting when they start changing their beliefs, even though it's like you're changing your beliefs in a way that would like be more likely to hurt your career as opposed to help it.
I know.
Yeah, it's like insane because what so many people on the internet want is they just want you to choose one side very comfortably and to like fit into it and to just say like these are the hyperbolic talking points. And then if you're like, well, let's add some nuance here, which pisses off your audience more often than not, you're like, well, you're a grifter. Like, well, who am I grifting to exactly?
So I'm going to stick up for my audience a little bit because to their credit, I think the majority of people in the audience are open-minded and are open to new information. I think that there is a small but very loud minority in our audience and on the left in general that really give the left a bad name. I think they're overrepresented on Twitter, and they're children. They act like children. I think some of them literally are like minors, and they see everything. And look, if they're young, I don't blame them. I think when you are young, it's a little more difficult to grasp nuance and how complicated and complex a lot of these issues are. You know, one of the things that Jesse Singles says all the time that I love, and he says it repeatedly, is it's complicated, because it is. Like, all of these issues are way more complicated than the way they're being portrayed in partisan media. And so what I want to do is actually understand those complexities. But here's the other thing: understand the other side in good faith, okay? Because I think that there are some stereotypes that the left has kind of bought into about what the arguments are on the other side. And, you know, it doesn't make us sharper to misrepresent what the other side is actually saying. It actually makes us weaker. If you understand what their arguments are, it'll then allow you to reflect on what your own weaknesses might be in regard to the arguments that you're making. And so, and then one other thing, and this was an unexpected outcome that I was talking to my husband about just last night. I've been a lot happier lately, like a lot happier. And I think it's because once you actually, and look, I want to make the distinction and like draw out a caveat. I'm not talking about like far right, like militia members. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about just mainstream conservatives, Republicans, whatever. Once you actually understand what their arguments are or where they're coming from, it's a lot more difficult to be hyperbolic about things, right? Yeah. And so you kind of start seeing the world around you for what it really is. And there's a certain amount of fear that kind of starts to dissipate, a certain amount of like hyperbolic thinking that starts to go away. And you start to see things a lot more clearly. And the world isn't as messed up as people would have you believe. And that's a good thing. Now, some people might get super offended at me saying that because they've completely bought into the hyperbolic thinking and they think the world's coming to an end. And there are terrible things happening. I don't want to minimize that. But we need to be realistic about what's actually transpiring in the country. And for areas where we need improvement or different policy solutions, we should actually have good faith debates about it and come up with those solutions. And I think that the current discourse is standing in the way of that.
Mm-hmm. That's really fast. I never thought about that, but it makes perfect sense if, you know, people go into politics and have this very like, the other side is either composed of like all racists who want to enable, you know, some kind of fascistic regime against me, or like the other side is all made of like, you know, communists who want to take over the country. Like, it's going to put you in this headspace. You're like, oh my God, like I'm in this fight for my life. Like, this is like the most important thing ever. And then you're like, well, once you start to see like, well, yeah, there's small pockets of that exist, but the average person is not that. You're like, oh my God, this weight has been lifted from my shoulder. I don't feel like the world is about to end.
Yeah, totally.
I want to say two things. First of all,
so I think you guys can recognize the like humanity in other people. Right? It's like, I feel like people just demonize. I don't mean demonize as in they say things to demonize, just subconsciously. Somebody doesn't agree with them. And in their brain, they're like, devil, enemy, right? And this is a more recent thing. Not that that's not natural to humans. Not, I mean, you know, historically people burned at the stake for being the wrong type of Christian. Right? So it's not like, oh, people have never done this. But I think social media is making this so much worse, right? It's making it so much worse because it pulls people off into extremes and then it sets them against each other. So formerly, if you're reading a right-wing newspaper or, you know, you're watching Fox News or whatever, right? You're not actually then being constantly confronted with people who don't agree with you, who also are reading super biased stuff that now you're banging heads, right? It was bad enough then. The division that's caused by those kind of like, by that kind of political division was in old media was bad, right? But on the new media, online, it just gets worse and worse and it's just fueling divisions. And so on this channel, right, try and be sensible, have our own views, and think for ourselves, and not be dicks to other people, unless they deserve it, in which case it's funny.
I don't know your take on Jordan Peterson, but it is like the first rule is tell the truth, and I feel like coming to a place in your life where you're like, I feel like I'm honestly telling the truth now. I can see where that would make me feel completely better. I'm one of these people who just hates thinking I'm being dishonest, or if I'm in a position where I'm forced to be dishonest for a job or something like that, I just, it's horrifying for me. So, and I do think it is kind of politically expedient for a lot of people to categorize far right, racist, Nazi pieces of shit who, you know, none of us are in favor of, for moderate Republicans who just want some, you know, they have a different spin on some sort of policy prescription, which my thinking of the world is, you know, you've got the conservatives on the right who are kind of playing defense for society, and you have liberals and progressives on the right who are kind of, or on the left who are kind of playing offense for society. They're the ones that are pitching all of these crazy policies for making society better. And conservatives are kind of saying, well, we're kind of good where we are now. Should we take the risk of doing this? And you really need, I mean, what sports team that doesn't have a good offense and a good defense is going to be a winning team? So a lot of the political polarization I see as part of the problem here. And one of the nice things about you is starting to realize, you know, there are people on the right that aren't just crazy, insane racists, and maybe you can communicate their arguments clearly to your audience, which is a great position to be in. We might be able to deal with some of the political polarization.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, look, I disagree with many of the policy ideas they have or the perspectives they espouse, but there are good faith, thoughtful, conservative Republicans out there. Like, I think Glenn Loury is a good example. You know, again, I might not agree with everything he has to say, but he's a thoughtful person, and he is not in any way justifying, white supremacy or some of the like hyperbolic things that he might get accused of by those on the left. And again, it's really about understanding in good faith the other side and being able to, I guess, debate the issues as opposed to like what I see happening right now is I want the left to engage in the argument as opposed to what I see happening, which is them engaging in like ad hominem in a lot of cases, character assassination or like statements about the individual's character based on their preconceived notions and based on what they heard other streamers say about the individual. It's like, okay, just take a step back for a second. You need to address the point that this person is making. And if you're not addressing the point that this person is making, and instead you're turning around and throwing all sorts of like accusations at them to make them seem like they're immoral or they're bad people, then that tells me that you don't really have an answer to what they're saying, And I see that happening more when it comes to culture war related issues as opposed to economic issues. And that's the other thing. I mean, I think that the left has completely, and they'll deny this, but I mean, just go to Twitter right now. They've like abandoned economic policies and instead hyper focused on incredibly divisive, like identity related issues, right?
Yeah.
And and like their take is always, oh well, the other side wants us they're racist, that's why. They're transphobic, that's why. And it's like, no, you got to do more than that. So if you're gonna, if you're gonna refute,
you see this on the right. It's the same reason that on the right they're pushing all the anti-trans stuff, all the blah blah blah, right? And it's that nobody has any solutions to the crises that are going on at the moment. Like in most developed countries, you have a really serious crisis of low wages. The wages have not been rising in line with inflation for a long time, and now. We've in the last couple of years, it's gone down now. We've had very high inflation. And so what you're having is the people are earning, 20-30% less than they were 10 years ago. Now, fair enough, the people 10 years ago may have had pay rises since. But overall, what's happening is like wages are just not keeping pace with inflation with prices. Cost of living gets higher. And and then no one actually even has any idea what to do, because even just raising the minimum wage isn't going to solve those problems. Right? We need everyone to be getting more money. So people don't, and like the thing is, I think this takes a lot of probably bipartisan, like working together, multi-party, and really sitting down thinking, how do we do this? But in the current climate, we're never going to get that. So people would rather scream at each other about social issues. Right? Rather just do that. Not that social issues aren't important, not that it's not very important, not that these things don't matter. They do matter. What kind of a society we want to live in does matter, right? I'm a liberal, okay? I care about people having the ability to live their life in the way that they choose. Right? That's very important to me. I want to live in that society. Social issues are important. However, right, they're starting to become, not even just the issues themselves, screaming at each other is starting to become an alternative to doing anything, right? So now we're screaming at each other and now we're not solving any problems. Now we're just screaming at each other about social issues, getting more and more extreme until basically both sides are mental, right? And then what? And then we have no solutions to actually a lot of the things that are really annoying people, that are really causing problems, like poverty, right? Like lack of opportunity, like the fact that wages have stagnated for most of the population. And we're ignoring all of this, and we'd instead rather scream at each other, where both sides just get more and more and more extreme instead of having a conversation. When really, if you want to change society, really the only way to do it is to convince people who don't agree with you, right? You cannot get change without convincing people.
saying, then actually address the points they're making. And if you're not going to do that, you're going to come out looking incredibly weak and childish.
You probably don't know this, but we talk about MMT and UBI on the stream quite often. It drives people crazy. I mean, how do you make affordable housing sexy? It's not necessarily a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it's surprising because I did a story just last Wednesday on Airbnb crashing. And,
I watched that vid, yeah.
Yeah, and that video, I'm kind of shocked. It got like 200,000 views. It was not something I expected. I thought like, oh, it's a dense, like statistics-driven, video, but it did well. And I think that there is a hunger for those types of videos and for that type of content. It's not going to go super viral like some hyperbolic, video about like a police shooting or about an alleged Karen, right? But I don't really care. Like I just look, I don't want to be part of the problem. I don't want to add to this toxic discourse that does nothing to improve anyone's life. And I feel like I've been engaging in that and I feel embarrassed about it. And that's really where I'm coming from. I want to get people healthcare. I want to get people housing. Those are the issues that matter. Okay.
Well, in order to do that, you kind of have to work with Republicans. And that's where I think this stereotype of Republicans as evil racists is ultimately not helpful in the end. If you want healthcare, you can't work with the evil racists to get healthcare done. You just can't do it.
Well, I mean, it's hilarious because, okay, let's put healthcare aside for a second, because here's the other thing. The far left will push ideas that are not popular with the general public, right? Yes. So I think that protecting, marginalized communities, protecting the transgender community is important. However, when you move out of or move far away from making sure that they are not denied housing, making sure that they're not denied healthcare, when you move into like these more fringe areas of like, I mean, there was a story out of the UK this week, blows my mind. There was an LGBTQ group in the UK who suggested that instead of referring to vaginas as vaginas because it might be offensive to transgender men, one of the potential replacements or substitutes could be bonus hole.
Oh, no. Bonus hole?
Yeah, bonus hole. And listen, people don't like this stuff, okay? They might not be on Twitter talking about how much they dislike this stuff, but on average, every normie woman I've talked to is like, I can't stand this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's silly. See, the thing is, bonus hole is quite funny if you're joking around about it, right? And I think that literally seen how it started. It starts with people making jokes about, yeah, with your bonus hole. That was funny. They were funny jokes. But then people are like, no, that's now... But you can't go offline and start saying to people, no, that's what we should call it, just to be inclusive to trans men. Right? Or... Sorry, to trans women, rather. She said trans men, but I think she meant trans women. Yeah, because otherwise... Trans men were... Yeah, so... Oh, I suppose... Maybe trans men don't want it to be called a vagina, they want it to be called a bonus hole. No, that doesn't make any sense. Surely it'd be a trans woman. Christ, I don't know. I don't even know what's going on. I don't know. I don't know now.
Jake and I recently talked about it. I think we talked about it in the context of, trans athletes or whatever. And it was, hey, we got to be a little more strategic because if you do this, if you start pushing the mainstream Democratic Party to run their campaigns on these like fringe issues, they might not get reelected or they might not get elected at all if they're running against a Republican in a district. And the response, and it's the same response we got when we made the same point about the stupid prison abolition movement, is we don't care. We don't care. It's the right thing to do. We don't care. And it's like, well, okay. But then you complain about what Republicans are doing in various red states. So do you want more Republicans to get elected? And do you want more of these, look, I think that some of these laws that have been passed in various red states, for instance, banning gender affirming care for adults, between the ages of 18 to 25, I think that's wrong. I think adults should be able to make a decision about their own bodies. I do think that there is a worthwhile debate when it comes to, hormone blockers and cross-sex hormones for children. And we should have that debate in good faith. But I don't want the pendulum to swing far to the right. I would venture to say the left feels the same way, except I'm not so sure. Because to them, going on Twitter and patting themselves on the back for being the most pure is more important to them than strategy. It's more important to them than actually accomplishing the policies that they claim to want to accomplish. Every time I make that point, they'll be like, oh, but you don't even know. There are people on the ground, activists on the ground, working hard to make this happen. And it's like, I mean, I'm not blind. I see what's happening in the country right now. So you can tell me about, your imaginary on the ground activists making real change happen as we speak, but I'm not buying it. So it is what it is. True. And they can get as offended as they want.
The amount of the online stuff that is LARPing is ridiculous. Where I'm going to disagree with Anna, though, right, is I don't think that that's the majority view. I think sometimes people hear the loudest people and go, oh, that's the majority view. So, oh, that's the view of the left now. No, that's the view of the online left, the loudest people, the craziest people. If you speak to people who are actually involved in politics, who are actually doing something, who aren't online LARPers, most of them don't agree with the crazies.
I don't really care. I'm not a mouthpiece for anyone, any political party, any political group. My obligation is to share the facts of the story with my audience to the best of my ability and then do good faith analysis on those stories. And if they don't like my analysis, they can make whatever decision they want about whether they support or watch the show. And that's why I say I might be engaging in a little bit of self-sabotage because I don't know what the outcome of all of this is going to be. There is no big play here. I'm not leaving TYT. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I don't know what the outcome will eventually be, to be honest.
I have a kind of contentious take. I'm curious how you feel about it, where, I look at you call them the small, loud minority on Twitter. That we have this kind of like far left identity obsessed, we don't care about practicality, kind of purity spiraling group of people. And, the reason I think that this is happening is that for whatever reason, there's been this shift among a lot of young people, especially online, where there's a shift away from the philosophy of liberalism into more of a socialistic philosophy. And do you see that happening from your perception?
I do. I think that to some extent I subscribe to that. And look, honestly, I'm at a point where I want to be a little more pragmatic because I want to accomplish something. I want to improve people's lives, as much as we possibly can. And when you have a maximalist approach, you're less likely to make that happen and you turn a lot of people off.
Fuck that. Let's laugh on Twitter and scream at each other. Let's go berserk.
Because they're in this like echo chamber on Twitter, I think they're under the assumption that most Americans agree with them. I think most Americans want a mixed economy. We're currently a mixed economy. I definitely want to socialize healthcare. That's like the area that I would say I'm the furthest left. But I don't agree with denialism. I never have. I don't agree with burning down our institutions because they're inherently racist or they're inherently this or that. I think that some institutions could use reform. I was totally on board for reforming policing. I was never once on board. I never once called for abolishing police. And so the abolish movement, I think, is insane. And I think the fact that I'm willing to say that has led to a lot of people hating me. And I don't care at all.
it's interesting because, like, I mean, personally, I'm not in favor. Yeah, I want a public option, but I'm not in favor of, like, economic socialism. But it's interesting to me that the movement, it seems like currently, it's kind of like the socialist energy in America right now seems to have drastically shifted away from economic questions entirely, and to just to take that kind of lens and put it on these cultural issues, specifically race. And that is very bizarre to me. It's like we just kind of lost. And this came up a lot with the affirmative action Supreme Court ruling just happened, where I understand people criticizing the idea that they don't think a colorblind approach would necessarily bring about racial equality or whatever. Like, even if I disagree with that, I understand what they're saying. The thing that's kind of frightening to me is people saying that the goal of colorblindness is either not likely, impossible, or not even desirable. And to me, that's a drastic shift. Like, okay, I understand you want to do things to get there, but the goal should still be kind of this liberal notion.
Yeah, I think so many people forget this. And like, colorblindness is a silly thing. 'Cause you're not never. Oh, are you black? I hadn't noticed. Right, that's not going to happen. But you'd want it to eventually be, I don't know, more like hair color or something, right? Like, it wouldn't really make a difference. It wouldn't really be something that should affect you in any way in society, right? Maybe you come from a minority ethnic group, you have a culture, I'm not arguing against that. But what I think is the goal was colorblindness now would be stupid because, like, there's still racism. So, like, pretending, I don't see color is ridiculous, right? That's not the society we live in. Right? However, the goal should be to get to a society where that's not going to affect you in any way, right? Like, getting to a society where it doesn't matter in any way what ethnicity somebody is, as to what kind of life they're going to live, as to how people are going to treat them, all of that surely should be the goal. I sometimes feel like, especially in America, but it's true in Britain, it's true in a lot of places, there's this, people have almost, like, especially often talk as if there's two separate nations, especially in America with black and white people specifically. Like, there's two separate nations that live there that are never going to unite, that are never going to live together. The best they can do is have good relations between the two countries. And it's like, that's not a way to build a healthy society, right? For anyone. Right? And again, I'm not saying we can just be, I don't see race, I don't know. You should. There's injustice. We need to understand it. But that's not the goal. And like, the goal is to fight that injustice, so we can go into a society where you're not paying attention to race, where you're not paying attention to these kind of things, right? That's the goal, surely. Otherwise, what are we doing?
Of colorblindness at the end of the day.
Well, I would posit this question: when the culture wanted colorblindness, when that was like I guess in general, the agreed upon goal, I feel like race relations were better, like much better
I agree.
than they are today, right? Yes. So, look, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I'm a little scared I'm afraid of, like, talking to people who are outside of my race because I don't know if I'm going to unintentionally step in it, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's, and I hate that.
Right.
Like, there's this, like, I don't know, it's like frigid, because, like, if all of the message is toward me and people who, I'm Armenian, but still they call me white passing, so, just got to go with that, right? If people who look like me are constantly told.
I think that's an example of why race is kind of silly. You're going to count Armenian people as a... I think you kind of... Yeah. Race as a concept is quite silly because it just doesn't tack onto biology. I think that's why really should move to speaking about ethnicity, right? So say, using the American context that she's talking about, you could say that, black people and white people are ethnic groups that live in America, right? Rather than, or black people, or there are various ethnic groups, like, right? Whereas talking about race, it's just stupid. When you go to, it's like, okay, so Armenian people are from kind of the Middle East or so, whatever you want to call it. So, okay, are they not white? But then, they look like Anna. So, and then people, you want to go to Africa and, just look at East Africans, look at like Somalis versus people from Nigeria. They don't look the same. So, yeah, I think it's just a side note, but it does show that the concept was created by racists to justify empire. It is a silly concept.
You are inherently racist. Okay, you are inherently a bad person. Mm-hmm. If that's the start, and I had this debate with Cenk when it came to our rhetoric in regard to the other side, right? If the starting off point is you are trash and we think you're evil,
yeah,
then
totally.
how does that? You're never going to move in a better direction. You're not going to move the country in a better direction. You're not going to improve race relations. You're going to make it worse. And that is what I see happening. I think a lot of the division is due to the backlash to that kind of rhetoric. And I think I think racism exists for sure. Do I think the majority of white people are racist? Do I think white people are inherently racist? No, I do not. I think that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a racist stereotype.
Yeah. I mean, it's just as racist to say, Black people are inherently dangerous and violent, right? That's a disgusting and racist thing to say. Why is it okay to have some generalized stereotype about white people? I think that's wrong as well.
Look, when we covered a lot of the critical race theory debate that was going around, it's kind of gone away momentarily, but I imagine it'll probably come back with the election coming, because obviously they're going to use it to hit DeSantis. But I mean, a lot of, and Sitch can speak better to this than me because he's read a lot of the books on critical race theory. It seems like critical race theory is trying to promote this negative stereotype of whites, that whites are just inherently racist, and that liberal society will never be able to be colorblind because of this inherent racism that they have. And they've even labeled it whiteness, which is like, we've had people on the show before that have tried to tell us, no, whiteness is just, that's just neutral. And I'm like, well, I mean, if we were talking about criminality and wanted to label it blackness, don't you think people would kind of be thinking that's a little racist? Like, we probably shouldn't do that. So, but there so many people who study this critical race theory stuff, they're like, they're working on their PhD in it, like they're fully invested in the system. They've got some advisor that has studied it for 35 years. Like, you're never going to change their minds about this stuff. It's kind of, I don't necessarily know where we turn on it.
I mean, look, for academics who have dedicated their lives to that type of curriculum, yeah, I mean, they dedicated their lives to it. It's pretty deeply ingrained in their minds. It's kind of difficult to reverse that. But, the whole thing, look, I don't agree with CRT. I don't agree with that theory. I don't, whatever. But my issue with the right was that they were making it seem as though CRT, which is a graduate level curriculum, is being taught in like elementary schools and stuff. And so I would have preferred for them to be a little more precise in what they mean, right? Because if they want to say that certain elements of critical race theory have now infiltrated mainstream public school curriculum, okay, that's an interesting point to make. Can you show me where? Show me specific examples. Then we're having an actual conversation about it. But overall, I think that it's incredibly divisive in a pluralistic society to make generalizations about any group of people, to refer to any group of people as inherently evil or racist or whatever the accusation is. I think that you need to take people as individuals and judge them by their actions as individuals. And do I think that there are individuals in the country who believe in white supremacy and all of that? Absolutely. Obviously we have, a pretty dark history when it comes to the way that we treated Black people in this country. I acknowledge that. But I think one of the issues that I'm also having recently is this notion that there has been no improvement. And everything has been the same. There's, those race to dinner ladies, like they're special. You did
a great job of framing the critical race theory very honestly, I think, about, obviously critical race theory. No one's pulling out a book by Derek Bell in second grade and saying, hey, we're going to study critical race theory. Isn't it so much more intellectually stimulating to understand both the right and the left argument? I feel like it's rather than just straw man. But real quick on the critical race theory, I do think, and this is where I think they do have an argument, like they do these like privilege walks where they have all the kids stand out in the quad and they list off things like, is English your second language? Well, I don't know. I kind of think like if you're bilingual, you have an advantage over me. I only speak one language, English, and frankly, not very good. So I feel like if you're bilingual, why am I the one that speaks one language taking a step forward and the bilingual kid is standing behind me? And that, I mean, you can make a direct link to CRT and that stuff.
Well, it's interesting that you provide that example. So English was my second language. My parents came to the country as refugees in the late 70s. They escaped Soviet era Armenia, came to the United States, did not speak a word of English. They learned English eventually, right? But it took some time. And so in the household, between the time I was born and the time I finally went to elementary school, all they spoke was Armenian. All I knew was Armenian. And I remember before there was like an entrance exam, I had a meeting with like one of the counselors at this elementary school, and she would like pull up cards that had letters on it, English letters on it. And she's like, do you know what this letter is? And I'd be like, no. And I remember leaving that feeling like garbage. Like I left that and I was like, I'm dumb. I don't know anything. I remember crying and like whatever. And then what I did was I forced myself to wake up super early as a kid to watch Sesame Street. And that's how I learned English. Anyway, I give you that anecdote about myself because it's a very personal thing. And luckily I have the kind of personality and the intellectual curiosity to like want to learn and to want to be better. And there might be some other people who, for them, English being a second language is more of a challenge, right? They might have more difficulty in learning or grasping a new language. So I can understand how that could be seen through the lens of privilege. But I think you also make a valid point. Once you've learned English in America and you still have the skills of a second language, in my case, it would be Armenian, that does tend to be a highlight or something that could be highlighted on your resumes or your CVs. So valid point. It just really depends on where the person is in their lives.
Well, if their point is to teach people that some people have better advantages than other people, I'm not necessarily against that. Where they make it racial and the need to make it racial and create all these racial stereotypes around it, I just feel like, what are we doing here? We're taking steps backwards. Why are we doing this?
Also, I'm not sure like that, teaching kids like, oh, this kid is privileged over you. I'm not sure the psychological effects that's going to have necessarily on the children. And it's kind of also like the bullying that commonly takes place on campuses across the country. I mean, you're providing more fodder for that.
Yes.
Exactly.
I don't think that's really a helpful way to talk about, race dynamics in the country. I don't know. I experienced none of that when I was in public school. And I feel pretty lucky that I grew up, look, it wasn't perfect, but I do feel lucky that I grew up in the 90s because that was probably the peak of the attempts to live in a colorblind society. I just feel like race relations were better then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, obviously not perfect, but what I'm experiencing now is, again, incredibly divisive. And I don't like the generalizations about, you know, like white women, white people in general, the fact that, you know, oh, this every institution, racism is deeply ingrained in every institution. We've got to burn it all down. And it's like, what are you guys doing right now? Like, what are you really doing, and what are you really advocating for?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to fast forward to this bit because we're covering the drama. We've got a lot to cover. That was an interesting discussion, but I want to stick to the.
You can take some of the injustices in the world or in the country you live in and have that inform every decision you make and have that impact your mentality in regard to what you can and can't accomplish, right? Mm-hmm. And I think to some extent, and I haven't fully formed an opinion on this, right? It's just something that I'm leaning toward and I want to explore it more. I'm a little bit concerned that the left, and at this point I'm talking about the left broadly, I'm a little concerned that the messaging that they've engaged in for quite some time now toward the Black community is to some extent insulting toward them and infantilizing toward them and stereotypical. So like it was kind of jarring to me in the whole affirmative action debate. And there seems to be this like weird agreement that I don't agree to, that like, oh my God, if we don't have affirmative action, you know, Black people could never get into colleges or universities.
Yeah, that's so bad.
And I just don't like, I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way. Sometimes I'm worried that the messaging, the hyperbolic messaging, because think about it, if you're told over and over again, this country's unfair, you're never going to make it, why even try? Like, and I'm worried that disempowers people. So I don't know. It's something that I want to explore more. I want to understand more. Maybe there are some sociologists that have like studied this and researched this. And if you guys have any recommendations, I'd love to read it. But
you're actually on solid ground in this one, because I saw Cenk's opinion on this, on the overturning of affirmative action. He was in favor of it for the same reason I'm in favor of it, because it creates all these negative stereotypes. And a huge contradiction I saw on the left. I'm like, I don't necessarily know how to process this, but they're saying Clarence Thomas, they're using affirmative action to call him stupid. And I'm like,
wait, what? Well, I mean, you're playing into Cenk's argument.
Yeah, right? Totally. They're saying, look, he benefited from affirmative action, and that's why obviously he's wrong about this. He's stupid. I'm going, this is the problem. This is totally the problem. So, it seems like on the affirmative action one, you're definitely on firmer ground because you got Cenk on your side. So it's the other places where you have to beat Cenk up, and that's like the Democrats are secret Republicans. I noticed you launched.
So my view on affirmative action is. If there really aren't enough people, let's say there's not enough Black people, for example, who are getting into university, I think it can be good to sometimes maybe give an advantage. Say you've got like, in that instance, you've got like a white kid, you've got a Black kid, they both got the same results. They both did well in their interview. It might be better to go, okay, well, we're good, right, more Black people need a fair shot at this. Let's pick the Black guy. Let's do something like that. But what I dislike about it is, I think that you need to, if people aren't achieving things, now I think we need to look at why. So if it is because there is a racial bias, something like that in admittance to university and hiring for jobs, then that can be countered by saying, no, listen, you have to be more aware of this, and you have to think, okay, two people come for an interview, they've got the same skills, got the same qualifications, one of them's Black. Isn't maybe okay, good idea to get them in. But if people aren't getting the skills, if people right, then that's actually a bigger issue that we then need to look at, right? So if you're saying that actually Black kids aren't doing as well at schools, they're not getting into university, to the best universities at the same rate. Okay, well we must solve that problem. That's a crisis. We have to solve it. Right? You can't just go, oh well, we'll just account for it in the. Like, no, we have to solve that problem. Why aren't the schools as good? Why aren't they doing as well? What are the reasons for this, right? Because that's part of systemic racism too, right? Might you fast forward to the Lance bit, because
you launched an attack on him last week about that one. What's your take on this theory? We've debated this theory on the show as well, and Sitch is always fighting against this. Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same.
Well, okay, so it's complicated. Like it's a nuanced thing to talk about, because I do think that the Democratic Party has come a lot closer to the Republican Party on some economic issues, right? So it's no surprise to me that at this point, there's always like a handful of Democratic senators, when Democrats have the majority in Congress, to like basically raise their hands and say like, no, we're against these, economic liberal policies. Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin were the two that were willing to raise their hands in regard to the Build Back Better plan. But they're not the only two. They were just the first two who were willing to publicly speak out against it. But there are Chris Coons, another senator, like there's a bunch of, I think, economically conservative Democrats who would definitely serve as obstacles to some of the more progressive economic policies. And I think the reason why is because over the years, and certainly after, Citizens United, you have this increase of incredibly wealthy donors not just donating to the Republican Party, they're donating to both parties, right? And look, anyone who tries to argue that these aren't legalized bribes, like, what do you think they are? Every election cycle, the amount of money that pours into election coffers increases. There are some donors that focus on...
I don't think they're legalized bribes. That's more complicated. I don't want to get into the campaign finance issue, right? But I just think it's interesting that on any of the major issues, like, Ana is very clearly on the left, right? On all of the major issues. So everyone's like, oh, she's going right-wing now. She's becoming right-wing. Well, in what way? In what way do you mean? What they actually mean is she disagreed on 2 or 3 things and then was like, why is everyone being horrible to me because I disagree on 2 things? Yeah, which is crazy. Well, I do think you always have to be careful. I expect to gig the chat and go, yeah, so what? Fuck it. It always is. They'll never be happy. You can never apologise, right? You just need to... I'm not saying don't apologise in life. If you've done something wrong, apologise normally. On the internet, right, if people are just screaming at you and you're in the right, fuck them. Just honestly, just gig the chat. Just make fun of them. It's the only way.
On the right, like, for instance,
they'll never
the majority of money coming from the NRA goes to Republican candidates. But when it comes to some of these multinational corporations,
let me cut in a second, give you like a different perspective, because I'm with you, and I don't.
But when it comes to some of these multinational corporations,
let me cut in a second, give you like a different perspective, because I'm with you, and I don't, like, I'm not in favor of all this money flowing into politics. And even look, the argument I usually hear is that, you know, sooner or later the representative has to be responsive to their actual voters. So if the actual voters want a certain policy prescription and the rich donors want a completely different one, they have to cheat, you know, finagle to get it in there. And I don't, like, I'm not Pollyanna about it. I think that does go on. But I'm skeptical of this idea that you can give a bunch of money to a politician and they can brainwash their constituencies into, like, wanting things that there's no way in hell they would want.
I don't think that they're brainwashing their constituents into wanting things they don't want. I think what they're doing is they're pivoting to the culture wars in lieu of focusing on the economic issues, where I think that there is, I wouldn't say exact agreement, but there's definitely more agreement and increasingly more agreement between Democrats and Republicans on these economic issues. And I think part of the reason why the culture wars are front and center and getting worse every election cycle is that in an effort to differentiate themselves from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party has leaned into the culture wars more and more, I think to the detriment of the country to a large extent. And so, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw after what happened with the George Floyd murder, you have Democratic leadership kneeling in kente cloths and stuff like that. And it's just, that is at this point, that is what they lean into for their campaigning. I think it's fascinating, though, that Biden has decided, for his reelection campaign, seems like he wants to focus more on his economic accomplishments. And I'm going to be honest, I was about to go on the show and be overly critical of Biden on his economic accomplishments, but obviously I got to do my due diligence. And then I saw some areas of improvement, some areas where he still needs a lot of improvement. We did a fair video on that when we talked about so-called Bidenomics. So I think it would be wrong to say that Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same. However, when there's increased agreement in regard to deregulation, tax cuts, like for corporations and for the wealthy, like all of that, I think that's where I feel frustration. I know that's where Cenk feels frustration. And what I want to do a better job of, and the reason why I kind of snap back at Cenk in that moment, is because I want us to be precise. He said something about how, Democrats just don't want to fight. And so what they do during these hearings is they have their, the people who they want to testify on their behalf, they sit them down and tell them, whatever you do, don't fight. I'm like, Cenk, you have no evidence of that. You can't just say that as if it's fact. I have an issue with that, right? However, I do think that I do want to see more of a fight from Democrats, but I want them to be strategic in their fight. I don't want them to just flail their arms around and scream like lunatics. I want them to think a little more strategically. Like when you look at LBJ, for instance, he was strategic in getting the Civil Rights, Act passed. Like he knew how to use carrots and sticks. And I want to see more of that from the Democratic Party on behalf of their voters, on behalf of the economic issues that their voters care about. I'd like them to kind of step back from the culture wars a little bit and kind of get their heads right about what's actually transpiring in the country, as opposed to feeding into the hyperbolic narratives. I think they've been doing that more and more, and I have an issue with that. And then one other area that I don't think gets enough attention, I've talked about it a lot. I do think that if members of Congress are investing in individual stocks, they are literally, they literally have a vested interest in maximizing profits for the companies they have invested in. They want a return on that investment. I think that's a problem. I think that there needs to be a solution to that. I don't know if it's blind trust. I don't know if it's okay to only trade mutual funds. An evangelical figure named Paul Weyrich. And Paul Weyrich actually wasn't passionate about abortion or outlawing abortion. In fact, the right-wing religious leaders didn't say anything against Roe v. Wade until about 5 years later. And the reason why they did is because they realized it would be a way to galvanize the religious, religious groups, basically form a broad coalition of religious voters that could apply leverage to the Republican Party and actually have some power. What really fueled Paul Weyrich was after desegregation, some of these schools wanted to, continue engaging in segregation. And if they did, the federal government said that they would pull funding away from them. And so that really upset Paul Weyrich. And he's like, we need to find a way to increase our power. And one of the ways he did that, one of the ways to galvanize religious voters was through abortion. And, he went to some church parking lots and like threw a bunch of pamphlets that had like gory images of like fetuses. It had a lot of, disinformation included as well. And it fired a lot of people up. And so it was a way of using the culture war as a tool to accumulate power. And so when you think about the manipulation that took place at the heart of the anti-abortion movement, you can kind of understand why that didn't really have much lasting power. I think throughout the years after Roe v. Wade, after people were able to actually enjoy the freedom that Roe v. Wade provided for them, it's kind of hard to take that away and then not face the political repercussions that follow.
Let me rephrase, because instead of the Republicans, why aren't Democrats just putting out a proposal that's a reasonable abortion cutoff? I mean, I've watched some of these congressional hearings, and you've got various witnesses on the panels, and they won't even, they'll ask them.
They're taking the Lance position.
Yeah, they're basically taking the Lance position. The Republicans will, obviously it looks great for the Republicans when they ask somebody on some congressional hearing and they can't say, yes, I'm not in favor of abortion in the 9th month.
Yeah, I don't know why they do that. I don't know why Lance did that. I think it's so dumb. It's so dumb.
Yeah.
And look, I don't think it makes sense to...
I don't know why people have to get extreme. This is what I mean about the polarization, right? Because it's easy to say, okay, unless there's a threat to the life of the mother or something, yeah, if you're like 9 months pregnant, no, you probably shouldn't have an abortion. But I think this is what happens as well when we get too much into the bodily autonomy argument rather than the fact that we're not talking about life. The life doesn't begin at conception. For most of pregnancy until about 24 weeks, right? Until about then, we're not dealing with a human life. Right, and I think that when you just go, oh, well, no, it's bodily autonomy, well, then if that was all that was going on, it's not the fact that we're saying, okay, 3 weeks in, you've got a blob of cells, you want to tell me that's a person, right? When that's not the argument is no, whatever you do, then yeah, why can't you just have it taken out? So yeah, but it's also just, again, the thing of we have to agree with 100%, which means we have to take the most extreme position. So people start worrying like, oh no, what if people aren't happy with me taking this position? What happens if I say, oh no, obviously I think late-term abortion should only be for the life of the mother or something, blah, blah, blah. Is that then I'm anti-abortion, then everyone's going to hate me, right? When like every country in the world has pretty much a cut-off unless, there's a life of the mother, there's a threat. Right? In Britain, I think it's 24 weeks. You can have an abortion up to 24 weeks. After that, you can't. And that's the same most places, right? Because it's not held to be a life until then, a human life. Right? But that's it. That's the project. We all have to take an extreme position. So you all have to believe, no, you should be able to have an abortion at 5 years old for the baby. She should just smash its head on a rock and that's fine. Or no, all abortion should be banned, even if a 12-year-old's raped by her own father. She should be forced to have it. Like insane, nonsense, mad stuff. And that's it. It's the polarization again.
Make
and we're going to
all
come on to that
abortion
later.
illegal in the third trimester. There are some rare instances where if the woman's life is in danger, right? But be clear about that. Just be clear about that. And you don't have to be a maximalist. I think the pressure to have a maximalist approach to all of these contentious policy issues has held the Democratic Party back in actually accomplishing things that protect people's rights. Yeah. And so they need to ignore, I don't know if it's because they're influenced by what they're reading on Twitter, but I can't say this enough. Ignore Twitter. Like, you were elected to represent the best interests of your constituents. So please do that and get off Twitter.
Yeah, and I think you're completely correct about like this maximalist approach. Because I think what's going on with Lance and with the people at the congressional hearings is that, the left's position on abortion has been, for women, it's my body, my choice. That's been kind of like the slogan. And while obviously bodily autonomy is part of the abortion conversation, I think it's too simplistic to kind of narrowly focus and say that's all the abortion conversation is, because that's obviously not. It's more complicated than that. Because the question is, well, is there a potential life inside of you, or is there a real life inside of you? What point does it become a life? What point does a fetus have rights of protection that a baby or a human would have? And so I think the problem is that because the slogan was "My body, my choice," and it kind of got narrowed down so simplistically.
Yes.
Essentially,
yes,
that is
exactly
if that's your position.
Said.
And you say "My body, my choice," it has to lead you down the road of you can get an abortion at any point as long as it's inside of you. And I think that simplistic focus, as opposed to having like a nuanced focus, is what led people down having these like insane prescriptions, which allow the other side to basically very easily attack and demonize them.
Well, I mean, look, if you are basing your policy prescriptions on slogans and you haven't actually done the work to understand these issues and come up with a nuanced opinion on it, then you're a moron, right? So like, no, but I'm being
But they're testifying in Congress. It's like, how are they getting these people?
No, but I don't care if they're testifying in Congress. I don't care if they're debating Tim Pool. Yes. If you're literally leaning on a slogan because you're too lazy to do the work, and that's all that informs what you're saying, we've got a problem. True. And that's the thing. Like, I just feel like we're in a culture right now where everyone is basing their very strong beliefs on whatever headline they read or whatever slogan they believe in. And it's like, okay, yeah, can you just scratch beneath the surface a little bit? Explore this topic a little more, and then tell me what you actually think. And if you think that a woman at 9 months should decide to end a healthy pregnancy, and that's totally fine, and that most of the people in this country are with you, I mean, you're sadly mistaken.
You're crazy.
You're crazy, yeah.
Well, we only have about 5 minutes left. There's one more thing I want to say, because you are constantly talking about regulation. One of the things that bugs me is that I feel like we're in this situation where, like, Democrats are reflexively pro-regulation and Republicans are reflexively anti-regulation. And I always feel like, I mean, what is the regulation? I want to know what the regulation is. So, and you've covered some. Obviously, you're in favor of affordable housing. I'm in favor of affordable housing. We both live in Los Angeles. God, we need affordable housing in LA more than anything. So you did a story last week, I think it was, about DeSantis adopting some anti-regulation bill or something like that. And you were kind of against it. And I kept thinking, well, is he adopting something from Texas that has really great affordable housing because they don't allow these environmental impact statements to come into play and prevent them from building more housing, which a lot of homeowners, but myself included, I would never do this, but a lot of homeowners want to protect the value of their homes by stifling more housing development by using these environmental impact statements to basically put off housing in their areas indefinitely.
Yeah, this is a mega problem in the UK. If you basically just say you can't build anything, it's going to cause noise, anything like this, you'll never get planning permission, right? So a local community can come in and go, it's going to cause noise, traffic, disruption, which of course it will. You're going to bring you're going to build something in an area, you're going to build a load of new houses. Of course there's going to be building works and traffic. Because we have insane planning laws, and it's basically just crippled our ability to build anything. Well, to build anything, but to build for years. They need to be deregulated, but people are way too scared of homeowners. So the Tories had a whole plan to deregulate, but then realised most of the voters are older, do own their own homes, and would have deserted them. So they had to back down, right? And so it gets very, very difficult, right? It gets very difficult. Yeah, she's completely right here. But he's completely right. Sorry, he is right. Although you do have to be careful with environmental stuff, because if you want to build a huge housing development and endanger the environment by doing it,
you're mixing up two stories. So I believe in the story about DeSantis. If I'm talking about the same thing you're mentioning.
Well, no. First of all, I know it's from two different stories, and I don't necessarily know about I don't know about the regulation that they were adopting. Vaguely, the regulation it looks like DeSantis was adopting was to prevent people from using regulation, but I didn't necessarily know what the regulation was, and I don't it. Doesn't it not seem that Democrats sometimes are reflexively pro regulation when they should just think about what the regulation is?
Well, I mean, look, you have to give me a specific regulation that Democrats are in favor of. Backing up to address the housing question.
That earlier,
so I think that there are certain areas where there's too much red tape when it comes to building housing, and I think there are areas where there's too little red tape. So I'll be very specific here. Where I would like to see less regulation is the area of what, honestly, NIMBYs do. And NIMBYs, in order to protect their neighborhoods from additional housing being built, they started implementing these regulations indicating that developers would have to do environmental impact studies.
Right.
And look, there is, I think, some justification in trying to see, all right, this housing development, could it have a negative impact on the environment? However, that's not really what the intention is. It's really meant to hinder or completely stop the development of new housing. And that is what California is dealing with right now. It's funny that you bring up, and so I'm against some of those regulations, not because I don't want to see what happens to the environment or how it could negatively impact the environment. I think that you can still do that. You can still do those studies without misusing them as a way of serving as obstacles to the development of new housing, which, as you know, we desperately need. Right. So I'm in agreement with you on that. The area where I'd like to see more regulation is we have a housing shortage. That is what is driving up prices of rents and also homes that someone might be in the market to buy. And what I'm noticing is there's been an ongoing issue of foreign investors, people who live in other countries who have no interest in living here, but they want to find a place to park their money. In some cases, they want to launder their money, and so they buy U.S. real estate. In some cases, it's commercial real estate. In a lot of cases, depending on which city you're in, entire neighborhoods are being bought up by foreign investors, and those homes just sit empty. And I think temporarily, and this is something that Texas did, this is something that Ron DeSantis is either trying to do or already did in Florida, and I think this is what you're referring to. They placed a ban on foreign investing in real estate, in housing.
This is a big call,
and they got a lot of backlash from Democrats on that because they're like, this is racist. And it's like, no, these are foreign investors who don't live here, and we need housing for people who live here. So I think it's totally fine to, put a pause, much like Vancouver did, on foreign investment until we increase the housing supply, in the very least, until we increase the housing supply. That's my stance on it.
No, that's great. And I can't believe the Democrats would use the race card for something like that. It's so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, look, it might be that I think the way Ron DeSantis did it is he didn't ban all foreign investing. He focused on specific countries.
Right.
And it was more of a political stunt. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. Yeah. But if he didn't do that, and if he was like, you know what, we've got a housing shortage. I want to look out for the people of Florida. So for now, I'm going to ban all foreign investment in residential real estate. I'm 1,000% behind that.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that as well. So we're right at about 3:00, and I want to be respectful of your time. So
yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was, I'm not going to lie, I was like a little bit terrified before coming on.
Were you really? Oh man, I was telling Sitch I was a little nervous too, but
yeah,
this was great. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are super friendly, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your audience, and I hope they enjoyed it. And yeah, keep it up.
You'll have to
a lot of
Right. So basically, okay. So now, right, we've seen Anna's general thesis of her views. Right, mostly still very left wing. Mostly like a couple of things, maybe where she's broken with the left, and then saying because of the attacks she's been getting, she feels a little politically homeless almost. Not politically homeless. She's still very clearly on the left, but feels very disillusioned. Right.